Word had gotten round that Henry wanted to blow the Olympic torch out. This of course was untrue, but all the engines believed the rumours, coupled with the unfortunate event that occurred at Crovan's Gate, and suddenly Henry became a pariah. All the engines would glare crossly at him whenever he steamed into the yard. Henry would remain silent. The Olympic torch had toured across the Isle of Man and was now making its way back to Sodor by ferry. Bill, Ben and Bear were waiting patiently for the ferry to dock. Edward watched on. "Now, Bill and Ben, you must be on your best behaviour," he advised. "This will be the most important cargo you will ever deliver." "What? Even more important than China clay?" squeaked Bill. "Incredibly important," emphasised Bear. "When we take charge of the torch train, we become ambassadors for the entire island." "What's an ambassador?" puffed Ben, confused. Edward laughed as the ferry docked and the torch was brought aboard the train. Again there were the familiar cheers from the crowd as Bill steamed proudly in front. Bear followed, and Ben was close behind. They delivered the flame to another torchbearer at Wellsworth Station. The torch travelled to different places, but never strayed too far from the railway. On its final day on Sodor, the torch eventually made its way to the small railway. Rex, Bert, Mike, Jock and Frank were extremely excited for its arrival. It was planned for the torch to ride in their open-top coaches. After all, it was such a lovely day. The 5 small engines had been cleaned and polished to the highest standard. Their paintwork glistened and their brass shone like gold. They stood to attention when Douglas steamed in. Moments later, Doug brought the torch in. It's here, twittered the small engines to themselves. Oliver arrived in time to see the torch transferred to the small railway. As the small controller made a speech about how honoured they were to carry the torch, Mike took his place as the relief engine behind the train. As he watched the flame flicker in the breeze, a distressing thought struck him. "What if it goes out?" he called in alarm to his driver. "What? The torch?" came the reply. "Aye, Bert's to pull the train. You know what happened when he pulled those coaches years ago?" puffed Mike. Mike was thinking back to the time when Bert had become annoyed with 2 clergymen, and to pay one out, he snorted under a low branch and rainwater covered not only the clergymen, but the passengers in the open-top coaches too. Naturally, it didn't go down well, and Bert had been teased about the mishap ever since. "The last thing we need is for him to get overexcited and to put it out," exclaimed Mike. "Not to worry," chuckled the driver. "If the torch goes out, security has a backup flame to relight it. That too has gone through a unique ritual in Greece, so it's still sacred." Mike was still unsure, but was overcome by great pride when the torch train departed. When the torch train returned, Mike explained to Douglas, Duck and Oliver about the backup flame. "Aye, they carry it around the little lanterns," said Douglas. "Clever bit of kit if you ask me." "Henry's to pull the torch train back to the mainland," huffed Oliver, concerned. "Well, if he tries anything, he'll have me to answer to," huffed Duck with feeling. Everyone waved goodbye to the torch as it made its way back to the big station. As the big station would be the last place the Olympic torch would ever go to on Sodor, the station was completely packed. Donald was feeling rather dizzy with the amount of photographs being taken, and Boko didn't know which way to look. Henry, however, still remained quiet. "Come on, Henry, show us a smile, you ought to carry the torch home," encouraged the driver. "Oh, goody," muttered Henry feebly. Henry was still in a bad mood for being accused of wanting the torch to be put out. Before long, Douglas, Duck and Oliver steamed in. They were amazed at the sheer size of the crowd. The police had to be called to help assist the transfer of the torch from one train to another. Meanwhile, the engines glared at Henry. "You'd better not try anything," snarled Donald. "I can't wait to see the back of it," snapped Henry. Then things took a turn for the worst. The crowd were getting too rowdy. In a split second they lurched forwards. The police managed to hold them back, but in panic the torch was separated from its security. Donald had already departed as security was trying to fight their way through to get to the train. As Henry pulled away, no one had noticed that security were not on board. Their last hope of catching the train vanished when Boko left too. The crowd died down and quickly dispersed. The Fact Controller was appalled and disappointed at the behaviour of the crowd, but even more surprised to find security standing in bewilderment on the platform with the backup flame. "We've got to catch that train, we cannot let the flame go out," they cried urgently. "Come with me," called the Fact Controller. "I have a plan." And with great haste they charged out of the station. Out on the main line, the engines were none the wiser that they hadn't a replacement flame on board. Donald and Boko soaked up the atmosphere from the crowds as they passed by. Henry showed his appreciation, but didn't feel any connection with the torch like everyone else did. He did, however, notice the smiling faces by the line side. Not one person was unhappy. All of them waved Union Jacks and spurred the torch on its way. Henry was lost in his thoughts about this until at last Barrow came into view. The three engines were greeted with a rapturous applause as they brought the torch into the station. As the torch disembarked off the train, a porter shut the carriage door behind it rather hastily. The resulting gust of air from the door blew the torch out. Everyone gasped in shock. The Olympic torch was no more. Donald and Boko were horrified, and even Henry was surprised to see it go out. "Bring forward the backup flame," came the call. But no reply was given. It soon became apparent that security were not on board, and that the backup flame had been left behind. "I dinna believe it," gasped Donald. "What are we to do now?" Henry looked around. The once smiling and beaming faces had all turned to disappointment and sorrow. The big green engine took a deep breath and made himself heard. "Excuse me, maybe until the real Olympic flame arrives you can use part of my fire. You know, just to keep it going," suggested Henry. There was a small pause until one of the Olympic torch officials agreed. Donald and Boko were speechless as Henry's fireman lit an oily rag from Henry's fire and relit the Olympic torch. The crowd cheered once again as the torch burned brightly. It wasn't long before Harold the helicopter landed close to the station. The torch's security, followed by the Fact Controller, arrived with the backup flame. The torch was put out and was restarted again with the official sacred flame from Greece. It was then handed over to a bearer who left to a symphony of whistles and cheers as they left the station. The engines didn't stop whistling until the Olympic torch was out of sight. The Fat Controller congratulated Henry on his quick thinking. "You have certainly captured the spirit of the Olympic torch, Henry," smiled the Fat Controller. "Indeed," agreed Burko. "Who'd have thought it?" On the way home, Henry thought of what the spirit of the Olympic torch meant to him and to everyone else on the island of Sodor. By the time he reached Tidmar's sheds, he found himself smiling. The story had arrived before him, and the engines were once again grinning at their friend. Duck broke the silence. "I thought you said the Olympic torch was pointless," he teased. "Now would I ever say a thing like that," joked Henry. The engines chortled amongst themselves. "So have you learnt what the Olympic torch represents?" inquired Edward. "I think I have," said Henry thoughtfully. "It's not just a flame. It's a symbol of unity, strength, and above all pride. I never thought I'd say this, but seeing all those people wave and cheer the torch on, they showed all those three things. And when I was able to relight the torch, I've never felt prouder to be part of it, and of course a part of this island too." "I couldn't have put it better myself," finished Duck. A feeling of unity follows the Olympic torch wherever it may go, and thanks to the torch, it brought unity to Henry and the engines once more.